The request that the Harvester Coalition sent to Earth asked for exactly one thing: a single physician, and the being who composed it spent 4 days choosing words humble enough to be sure the humans would not feel imposed upon. Coordinator Yenu of the Coalition Relief Office read the final draft one last time before transmitting it, and she was satisfied that it asked for the smallest possible favor. One medic. One human who understood the rot. That was all. The Coalition could not have known that the humans did not own a word for the smallest possible favor, and that asking Earth for help was less like asking a neighbor and more like pulling a thread on something very large that had been waiting a long time to be pulled. The rot was already in the third convoy when Yenu sent the request, and it was moving faster than the Coalition's own physicians could chart it. It had no name yet, because naming a thing requires understanding it, and nobody understood it. It began in the cargo holds, in the great living stores of grain and protein and seed that the harvester convoys carried between the hungry worlds of the outer coalition, and it turned the stores to a gray weeping sludge in a matter of hours. And then it turned the beings who handled the stores into something the coalition's medical texts had no category for. It was not a disease, exactly. Diseases could be fought. This was closer to a translation, a thing that took living matter and rewrote it into more of itself, patiently, hungrily, without malice and without mercy. And the only thing the coalition's physicians had learned in 2 months of dying was that nothing they tried even slowed it down. What they had also learned, in the way that desperate people learn things, was a rumor. The rumor said that the humans had met something like this before. The rumor said that Earth, in the long dark history that the younger coalition knew almost nothing about, had fought a thing the records called only the bloom, and had not merely survived it, but had ended it, completely, and had then quietly built an entire arm of its fleet around the single purpose of making certain it never happened to anyone again. The rumor said that if you asked Earth for help with the rot, Earth would not say no. Yenu did not fully believe the rumor. She had been a relief coordinator for 30 years, and 30 years of relief work teaches a being to distrust rumors of easy salvation, because the beings who most need salvation are the ones most willing to believe in it, and a coordinator who believes in easy salvation gets people killed. She had seen famines that no fleet could feed, plagues that no medicine could touch, disasters where the only honest thing a coordinator could do was choose who would be saved and who would not, because there was never enough of anything. So she had learned to plan for the worst and ask for the least, because asking for too much wasted the goodwill of those who might give a little, and a little was usually all there was. The rumor of a human fleet that ended blooms sounded, to her 30 years of hard experience, exactly like the kind of comfortable lie that desperate people told each other in the dark. But the third convoy was dying, and the fourth had just reported its first gray weeping hold, and belief was a luxury for people whose stores were not turning to sludge. So she sent the request, one medic, the smallest possible favor, and she addressed it to the human listening post at the edge of coalition space, and she did not expect an answer for weeks, because Earth was far, and humans were strange, and the favor, however small, was still a favor asked of strangers. She attached to it, out of long habit, a formal apology in advance, the careful coalition courtesy that thanked a benefactor before the benefit was granted, and begged forgiveness for the imposition, and she thought, as she sent it, that she had done all that could be done, which was very little, and that the third convoy would probably be dead before anyone read her words. Yenu had composed the request herself, against the advice of the relief office's protocol clerk, who had wanted to route it through 3 layers of coalition diplomatic review first. There was no time for 3 layers of review. The third convoy was dying in real time, and so she had broken protocol and written the thing herself, in her own words, and the words she had chosen were the most careful and humble she could find, because she had learned across 30 years that strangers give most readily when they are asked for least. She had written one medic, because one medic was a thing a stranger might spare without resentment. She had written the apology in advance, because an apology in advance was a courtesy that cost the giver nothing and warmed the receiver. She had been, by every measure of her long experience, exactly right about how to ask a stranger for help. She had simply been asking the wrong kind of stranger, a kind she had never met before, a kind whose answer to a small, humble request for the least possible favor was 4,000 warships in 19 minutes, because the small, humble request had touched the one nerve in the whole of human history that did not know how to give a small answer. She would think about that, in the years afterward, more than she thought about almost anything else. The whole catastrophe, and the whole rescue, had turned on a single misjudgment, and the misjudgment had not been a failure of her skill, but a limit of her experience. She had known every kind of stranger the coalition had ever met, the proud ones, and the greedy ones, and the indifferent ones, and the rare kind ones, who gave a little, and felt they had given much. She had not known that there was a kind of stranger who had built its entire civilization around a wound, and who heard in a humble request for one medic the exact echo of its own oldest agony, and who answered such a request not with a medic, but with everything it had, because it had sworn, 600 years before, that it would. No amount of skill could have prepared her for that. Some things can only be learned by meeting them, and Yenu met it on the day the board counted to 4,000, and it changed her understanding of the galaxy for the rest of her life. The answer came in 19 minutes. It did not come as a message. Yenu was still composing a second, more detailed report for the Coalition's own thin medical service, the one she actually expected to be the convoy's only help, when the Relief Office's long-range board, lit with a contact crossing into Coalition space from the direction of the human post, and then a second contact, and then the board stopped showing contacts one at a time and began showing them in blocks, the way a board does when it has given up counting and started estimating. "Coordinator," said the young analyst at the board, a Coalition juvenile named Seath, who had never seen a human ship in person and was about to see a great many of them. "Something is wrong with the count. The board is reading several hundred contacts. That cannot be right. We asked for one physician, one being. The board must be malfunctioning." Yenu came to the board, and she looked at the count, and the count was not several hundred. The count was climbing past several hundred while she watched, and the contacts were resolving now. And they were not relief tenders, and they were not hospital ships, and they were not the single small unmarked vessel a single physician would travel in. They were warships. They were the largest warships Yenu had ever seen, gunmetal and weathered and bristling, and they were arranged in a formation so vast and so disciplined that it took her a moment to understand that she was not looking at a fleet of separate ships, but at a single instrument made of ships. And the instrument was crossing into Coalition space, and it was heading for the third convoy, and the count had stopped climbing at a number the board displayed in full, because it had finally finished estimating. The number was 4,000. Seath stared at the number, and then stared at Yenu, and his young voice had the particular thinness of someone whose understanding of the universe has just been shown to be too small. "Coordinator," he said, 4,000 warships. We asked for one medic. One. There is no version of one medic that becomes 4,000 warships. Either they have misread our request, or they are not coming to help, or they are coming for some reason we have not imagined, and I do not know which of those is true, and I am afraid of all three. "So am I," Yenu said, and it was the truth, and she did not hide it from him, because Seath was young and frightened, and lies would not help him. "Hail them. Find out who they are. Find out why they have come. Find out what they want, and whether we can possibly afford it, because we asked for one medic, and Earth has sent 4,000 warships, and I need to understand what we have done." The hail went out, and the answer came back at once, in clean Coalition speech, in a voice that was calm and unhurried and entirely without threat, which was somehow more frightening than a threat would have been. "Harvester Coalition Relief Office. This is Admiral Cole Hartley, of Earth's 10th Fleet. We received your request for medical assistance with what you are calling the rot. We have seen it before. We call it the bloom. You asked for one medic." A pause, and when the voice came back, there was something in it that Yenu would spend a long time trying to name, and the closest she ever came was that it sounded like a promise being kept. "We do not send one medic to a bloom. We never have, and we never will. And after today, you will understand why. Stand your convoys down, and let us through. The 10th Fleet has come to do what the 10th Fleet was built to do." And 4,000 human warships swept past the stunned Coalition relief station toward the dying third convoy, and Yenu, who had spent 4 days choosing words humble enough to ask for the smallest possible favor, understood that she had not asked a neighbor for a kindness. She had rung a bell that Earth had been waiting a very long time to answer. Aboard the third convoy, a coalition cargo engineer named Bren Oda had not heard the hail, because Bren Oda was 3 decks down in the rot, fighting a war he was already losing with the only weapons a cargo engineer had, which were valves and bulkheads, and a stubbornness his species had not known it possessed, until the gray sludge came. He had sealed 4 holds with his own hands in the last day, watching through the small reinforced ports as the rot did its patient terrible work on the stores and on the 2 handlers who had not gotten out in time, and he had stopped letting himself look at the 2 handlers, because looking did not help, and there was work to do, and work was the only thing left that helped at all. The coalition's physicians had fought the rot the only way they knew, the way they fought every illness, with study and patience, and the careful methods of beings who believed that any sickness could be understood, and, once understood, treated. They had taken samples, they had run analyses, they had quarantined the sick and tried a dozen treatments, and watched every treatment fail, and tried a dozen more. It was good medicine, the medicine that had carried the coalition through every plague in its history, and against the rot, it was worse than useless, because the rot did not behave like an illness, and could not be fought like one. Every hour the physicians spent studying it was an hour the rot spent spreading, and the rot spread faster than any study could keep pace with, so that by the time the physicians understood one stage of it, the rot had already moved 3 stages beyond, and the understanding, when it finally came, was always an understanding of a thing that no longer existed, a map of a country that had already changed. The physicians had not failed through any lack of skill. They had failed because they had brought the right tool for the wrong kind of problem, the tool of patient study against a thing that punished patience, and by the time they understood that their whole method was the error, the rot was in the third convoy's holds, and the physicians who had not fled were already part of it. It was Bren Oda, in the end, a cargo engineer with no medical training at all, who had stumbled onto the only thing that worked, and he had stumbled onto it not through insight but through habit, the plain habit of his trade. When the rot came into a hold, a physician's instinct was to go in and study it, and try to treat the handlers who were caught. A cargo engineer's instinct, bred into him by 10,000 spills and breaches and contaminations, was to seal the hold and save the rest of the ship. The physicians had tried to cure the rot and lost everyone. Bren Oda had given up on curing it in the first hour, because curing things was not his trade, and had instead done the only thing his trade knew how to do, which was contain the damage and protect the larger structure, and that plain, unglamorous engineer's instinct had turned out to be the exact thing the situation demanded, the thing the humans had learned 600 years before, the thing the coalition's finest physicians had been too skilled and too well trained to see. There was a lesson in that, and Bren Oda would turn it over for years afterward, the strange truth that the convoy had been saved not by its experts, but by a working man whose only qualification was that he had stopped trying to be clever and started doing the simple thing his hands already knew. Bren Oda was not a brave being. He would have told anyone who asked that he was a cargo engineer, that bravery was for the convoy guard, that his job was to keep the holds sealed and the air clean and the convoy moving, and that he was simply doing his job. But he had been doing his job for 2 days without sleep, on a convoy where the physicians had given up, and the captain had locked himself in his cabin, and the rot was 3 bulkheads from the living decks enclosing. And there is a kind of stubbornness that looks, from the outside, exactly like courage. And Bren Oda had it, and it was the only thing keeping the third convoy's 6,000 crew alive. He had learned the rot the hard way, in the first hours, before anyone understood what it was. He had gone into the first weeping hold with the 2 handlers, thinking it was a spill, a contamination, a thing to be cleaned and contained by ordinary means. He had watched what it did to the stores, and then he had watched it begin to do the same thing to the handlers, and he had understood, in one cold instant, that he would carry for the rest of his life, that ordinary means were worthless, that there was no cleaning this and no curing it, that the only thing that could be done was to put a sealed bulkhead between the rot and everything still alive, and to do it fast, and to keep doing it as the rot ate its way toward the heart of the convoy. He had not been able to save the 2 handlers. They had been too far in. He had sealed the hold with them inside it, and the memory of their faces at the small reinforced port was the thing he did not let himself look at, because looking did not help. And there was a fifth bulkhead to seal, and a sixth, and a seventh, each one a little closer to the living decks, each one bought with a few more hours. "Engineer Oda," came the captain's voice over his handset, ragged and small. "The relief office is hailing the whole convoy. They are saying Earth has answered. They are saying Earth has sent 4,000 warships. Engineer, do you understand what they are saying? We asked for one medic, and the humans have sent a war fleet, and I do not know if that is rescue or invasion, and I do not know which I should be more afraid of." Bren Oda wiped the grime from the small reinforced port and looked one more time at the gray weeping hold beyond it, at the patient, hungry thing that had killed his stores and his handlers and would kill the convoy if it was not stopped. And he found that he was not afraid of 4,000 human warships. He had seen what the rot did. He could not imagine that anything the humans brought could be worse than what was already 3 bulkheads away. "Captain," he said, "I do not care if it is rescue or invasion. I care whether they can stop the rot. If 4,000 human warships can stop the rot, then I will worry about what they want afterward, when there is an afterward to worry in. Tell the relief office to give them anything they ask for. Tell them to give the humans the convoy, if that is the price. There is nothing left in these holds worth more than the crew, and the crew is 2 days from dead." He sealed his tools to his harness and started for the ladder. "And tell whoever is in charge over there that the rot moves faster than they think. Whatever the humans are going to do, they need to do it now, because I have 1 bulkhead left between the rot and the living decks, and I do not think it will hold until morning." The bulkhead did not have to hold until morning. The 10th Fleet was 19 minutes out when it answered the hail, and it was 19 minutes out for the convoy too, and Bren Oda was still climbing the ladder toward the last bulkhead when the first human ship arrived, and the way it arrived told him, before he ever saw a human face, exactly what kind of thing the Coalition had asked for help. It did not dock. The Coalition's relief doctrine, the one the convoy had been built around, called for a hospital ship to approach slowly, to match velocity over the course of an hour, to extend a sterile bridge, and screen everyone who crossed it. The human ship did none of that. It came alongside the third convoy at a speed that should have torn both hulls apart and stopped dead in the space of a breath, holding position so precisely that Bren Oda, watching through a viewport, could not see any gap between the human hull and his own change at all. Then it did not extend a bridge. It extended teams. A section of the human hull opened, and figures in heavy gray suits came across the vacuum directly, without tethers, moving with the unhurried certainty of beings who had done this exact thing a great many times. And they came not to the convoy's medical bay, but to the holds, to the rot, to the gray weeping sludge that the Coalition's physicians had fled from, and they went into it. That was the first thing Bren Oda learned about the humans. The Coalition's physicians had run from the rot. The humans walked toward it. His handset crackled with a new voice, human, female, calm, speaking the Coalition tongue with the faint accent of a translation matrix riding under a real voice. "HFY Engineer, this is Specialist Dana Ruiz, 10th Fleet Containment. You are the one who sealed the holds. Good work. You bought us the margin we needed. I need you to do exactly what I tell you for the next 2 hours, and not one thing more, and if you do, we save this convoy, and if you improvise, we lose it. Can you do that?" "I can do that," Bren Oda said. He was a cargo engineer. Doing exactly what he was told for 2 hours was, in fact, his entire profession. "Tell me what you need." "I need your bulkhead schematics, all of them, transmitted to me now. I need you to stay exactly where you are, and keep that last bulkhead sealed, no matter what you hear on the other side of it. And I need you to understand something before we begin, because it is going to be hard to watch, and I would rather you understood it than panicked." A pause. "The rot is not a disease. You already worked that out, or you would not have sealed the holds instead of treating the handlers. It is the bloom. It is alive. It is hungry. And it is smarter than it looks. You cannot cure it. There is no medicine for it. The only thing that works is containment and fire, and the only way to do containment and fire at the speed the bloom moves is to bring more hands than the bloom can outpace. And that is why we did not send one medic. One medic walks into a bloom and becomes part of the bloom. We send a fleet because a fleet has enough hands to draw the line and hold it everywhere at once. Do you understand?" "I understand," Bren Oda said, and he did, in the way that only a being who has watched the rot work could understand it. "You are not here to heal it, You are here to stop it from spreading. You are surgeons, not physicians. We are firefighters, Specialist Ruiz said, and there was something almost warm in it. We are the largest, best equipped, most experienced firefighting force in the galaxy, and we have spent 600 years getting good at exactly one fire. Now hold your bulkhead, engineer. Here we go. What happened over the next 2 hours? Bren Oda watched through the small reinforced port in the last bulkhead, and he never forgot a moment of it. The human teams did not fight the bloom the way the Coalition had imagined fighting it, with treatments and containment fields and careful sterile procedure. They fought it the way you fight a fire that is already in the walls, with overwhelming coordinated force applied faster than the fire could move. They sealed the convoy hold by hold, but they did not seal slowly. 4,000 warships meant tens of thousands of hands, and the hands moved through the convoy in a single coordinated wave, each team taking one hold, each hold sealed and burned and verified in the time it had taken the Coalition's fleeing physicians to argue about a single treatment. The bloom was fast. Bren Oda had spent 2 days learning exactly how fast. The humans were faster, not because any one of them moved faster than the bloom, but because there were so many of them, moving as one, that the bloom could not find an edge to slip around. And it tried. The bloom was not stupid. Specialist Ruiz had said it was smarter than it looked, and Bren Oda saw the truth of it as the bloom, sensing the line being drawn against it, changed. It stopped weeping gray and started reaching, sending tendrils of itself ahead, through ducts and conduits, and the small spaces between bulkheads, trying to outflank the line the humans were drawing, trying to find the one hold they had not yet reached, and establish itself there before they arrived. It was the strategy of a hungry, intelligent thing, and against the Coalition's physicians it would have worked, because the Coalition's physicians could not be everywhere at once. But the 10th Fleet could. That was the category error, and Bren Oda understood it watching through the port, in the cold, clear way that a working man understands a tool. The Coalition had asked for one medic, because the Coalition thought of the rot as a problem one expert could solve. The humans knew that the bloom could not be solved by an expert, only outpaced by a force. And they had spent 600 years building a force whose entire design was speed and coordination and sheer overwhelming number, a fleet that could be everywhere a bloom might reach, before the bloom reached it. When the bloom sent a tendril ahead to outflank the line, there was already a human team in the hold it was reaching for. When the bloom doubled back, there was already a human team behind it. Everywhere the bloom turned, the line was already there. 4,000 ships worth of hands, drawn into a net the bloom could not find a hole in, and slowly, hold by hold, the net tightened. Bren Oda watched one moment that he would tell about for the rest of his life, though it was a small moment, easy to miss. Tendril of the bloom found a maintenance conduit that even Bren Oda had forgotten. A narrow service run that connected 2 holds the schematics barely showed, and it slipped into the conduit fast, racing for a hold 3 sections away that the humans had not yet reached. A clean flanking move that should have given it a new stronghold deep in the convoy. And waiting at the far end of the conduit, already in position, calm as a being checking a routine valve, was a human in a gray suit, who had read Bren Oda's transmitted schematics, seen the forgotten conduit, understood in an instant what the bloom would do with it, and gone to the far end to meet it, before the bloom even started. The bloom raced down the conduit toward freedom, and met a sealed and burning end instead, and Bren Oda understood that the humans were not merely faster than the bloom. They were thinking ahead of it, reading the same convoy the bloom read, and arriving first at every place the bloom wanted to be. And that was a thing the Coalition's physicians, however skilled, had never once managed, because there had only ever been a handful of them, and the bloom had 1,000 places to go. Engineer Oda, Specialist Ruiz said, the bloom is going to come for your bulkhead. It has worked out that your section is the only living deck left on this side, and it is going to throw everything it has at the last sealed door, because that is what a cornered bloom does. It is going to sound, on your side of that bulkhead, like the hull is being torn apart. It is going to find every weakness in that door and push on all of them at once. I need you to hold it. Not forever. 6 minutes. We are coming up the same conduits it is using, behind it, and in 6 minutes, we will have it pinned between us and your door. 6 minutes. Engineer, can you give me 6 minutes? Bren Oda looked at the last bulkhead, the one he had sealed with his own hands, the one bulkhead between the rot and the 6,000 living crew of the third convoy, and he set his shoulder against it, the way a cargo engineer sets his shoulder against a thing that must not move, and he said the only thing there was to say, "I can give you 6 minutes. I can give you 6 hours if the door holds." "The door will hold, Specialist. I sealed it myself, and I do good work, and nothing made of sludge is getting through a bulkhead I sealed. Come and get it." And the bloom hit the bulkhead, and the next 6 minutes were the longest of Bren Oda's life. It did not sound like sludge. That was the thing that nearly broke him. He had spent 2 days thinking of the rot as a gray, weeping, passive thing, a spill, a contamination, and now, with all 6,000 lives behind him, and his shoulder against the door, he learned what it actually was, when it was cornered and hungry, and out of time. It hit the bulkhead like a living thing throwing its whole weight against a cage. The door, a meter of coalition structural alloy that Bren Oda had sealed with his own hands, rang and bowed and screamed, and the small reinforced port went gray, as the bloom pressed itself flat against it, searching, and Bren Oda could feel through his shoulder the patient, terrible intelligence of it, as it tested every seam of the door, every weld, every weakness, pushing on all of them at once with a coordination that no spill should have, looking for the one flaw that would let it through to the living. "Hold, engineer," Specialist Ruiz's voice came, steady in his ear. 4 minutes. We're in the conduit behind it. It knows we're here. It's deciding whether to turn and fight us, or keep pushing on you. Keep it pushing on you. As long as it's spending itself on that door, it's not spreading, and as long as it's not spreading, we win. Talk to me. Tell me what you're feeling through the door. Bren Oda talked, because talking was better than the silence, and because Ruiz had asked, and a cargo engineer does what he is asked. "It is testing the welds," he said, his shoulder braced, his voice tight. "All of them. At the same time, it found the weak one, lower left, where the frame was repaired before my time. It is concentrating there now. The door is bowing. Specialist, the weak weld is going to go. Not now, but it is going to go, and when it goes, there will be a gap, and it only needs a gap the width of a hair. Then you're going to seal the weak weld while it's pushing on it," Ruiz said, "because that's what a cargo engineer does, and because I've read your file in the last 10 minutes, and you're the best one on this convoy, and because I am asking you to. You have your tools. You have the schematic. 3 minutes. Seal the weld, engineer. I'll keep it occupied from this side." It was, by any reasonable measure, an impossible thing to ask. Bren Oda was being asked to weld a failing seam from the inside, while the most dangerous thing in the galaxy threw its whole hungry weight against the other side of it. But he was a cargo engineer, and sealing failing seams was his entire profession, and the human specialist had asked him to do the thing he was best at in the world, and there is a particular strength that comes to an ordinary working being when an expert looks at them and says, "You are the one who can do this." Bren Oda took his tools from his harness, and he knelt at the lower left weld with the bloom screaming against the alloy a hand's width from his face, and he did his job. He sealed the weld. His hands did not shake, because they were a cargo engineer's hands, and they had sealed 10,000 seams, and they knew how, and the bloom pushed and tested and pushed, and the weld held, and the door held, and Bren Oda knelt there with his welder in his hand, and his face a hand's width from the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, and he held the line for 6,000 lives, because a human firefighter had told him he could. 30 seconds, Ruiz said. It knows it's lost the door. It's turning. Engineer, get back from the bulkhead. Get back now, because in 30 seconds, we are going to do to this thing what we came 600 years and 4,000 ships to do, and you do not want to be touching that door when we do it. Bren Oda got back from the bulkhead. What the 10th Fleet did to the bloom in the conduits behind the last door, Bren Oda did not see, because Ruiz had told him not to be touching the door, and he had learned to do exactly what the humans told him. But he felt it. He felt the screaming against the bulkhead stop, all at once, the way a held note stops. He felt the patient, terrible pressure that had been testing every seam of the door simply cease to exist, not retreat, not regroup, cease, the way a fire ceases when it is finally and completely smothered. And he felt, through the deck and the hull and the bones of the convoy, the particular silence that comes when a thing that has been hunting you for 2 days is, suddenly and finally, no longer there. There was a moment In those first hours aboard the third convoy, when Bren Oda saw the human method whole, and understood that it was a different kind of thing entirely from anything the Coalition had imagined when it asked for a medic. He had climbed up to a viewing gallery to rest his shoulder, and from the gallery he could see down into 3 of the great cargo holds at once, and in all 3 holds the gray suits were working, and he watched them work, and he saw the thing that no single team on the ground could ever have seen, which was the shape of the hole. The teams were not working hold by hold in any order he could name. They were not starting at one end and moving to the other, the sensible way, the way the Coalition would have done it. They were working in a pattern that made no sense from inside any one hold, and perfect sense from the gallery, sealing not the holds where the bloom was thickest, but the holds the bloom would want to reach next, getting ahead of it, closing the doors it was racing toward before it arrived, so that everywhere the bloom turned, the way was already shut. It was the strategy of a being that could see the whole board, except that no single human could see the whole board, and Bren Oda understood, watching, that the whole board was being seen by all of them at once, 4,000 ships worth of beings sharing what they saw, each team a single eye and a creature with tens of thousands of eyes, and the creature thought faster than the bloom, because it saw more than the bloom, and it saw more than the bloom, because it was, in every way that mattered, larger than the bloom, in the one dimension where size could not be dodged, which was the dimension of attention. The bloom was one hungry thing, reaching many ways at once. The 10th Fleet was many things attending as one, and the many attending as one always saw the one reaching many ways coming, because attention shared is attention multiplied, and the bloom had never in 600 years met a thing that could attend to it from every direction at the same instant. That was the category error the Coalition had made, Bren Oda saw, and it was a deeper error than simply asking for too small a force. The Coalition had thought of the bloom as a problem of expertise, a thing one wise being could solve, if only the being were wise enough. The humans had understood, 600 years before, that the bloom was a problem of attention, a thing that could only be beaten by being watched from everywhere at once, and that no expertise, however great, could substitute for the simple overwhelming fact of enough eyes, enough hands, enough beings attending as one. A single medic, however brilliant, was a single eye. The bloom would have slipped behind it in the first hour and been gone. You did not send one eye to watch a thing that reached 1,000 ways at once. You sent 10,000 eyes, and you taught them to share what they saw, and then, and only then, the thing that had killed a young Earth 600 years ago could finally be cornered, because for the first time, it could not find a direction no one was looking. Engineer Oda, Specialist Ruiz said, and the calm in her voice had changed into something tired and satisfied, the voice of a firefighter walking out of a building that is no longer burning. The bloom is contained. Your section is clean. The convoy is clean. We caught it before it reached your living decks, and we caught it because you held the door and sealed the weld and bought us the margin. 6,000 crew on this convoy are alive right now, engineer, and a good number of them are alive specifically because you did your job when the physicians ran. I want that on the record. Earth keeps records. You're going to be in ours. Bren Oda sat down on the deck, his back against the bulkhead he had held, his tools loose in his exhausted hands, and for a long moment he did not say anything at all, because there was too much in him to fit into words. He thought about the 2 handlers in the first hold, the ones he had not been able to save, and he understood that nothing the humans had done could bring them back, that the rot had taken them before anyone had known what the rot was, and that this was a grief he would carry. But he thought too about the 6,000 who were alive, and about the small reinforced port that was no longer gray, and about the silence in the bones of the convoy, where for 2 days there had been a hunting thing, and he found that the grief and the relief could live in him at the same time, side by side, the way they always do, in a being who has held a line and lost some of what was behind it and saved the rest. Then he asked the question that the whole convoy, and the whole relief office, and eventually the whole coalition would ask. Specialist Ruiz, we asked Earth for one medic, one being, and Earth sent 4,000 warships. I am a cargo engineer. I do not understand the cost of 4,000 warships, but I understand that it is more than the cost of one medic, more than the cost of this whole convoy, more perhaps than the cost of everything the Harvester Coalition owns. Why? Why would Earth spend that, all of that, to answer a request for one medic from a people you had never met. And Specialist Dana Ruiz of Earth's 10th Fleet gave him the answer that changed how the Harvester Coalition understood the galaxy forever. 600 years ago, she said, the bloom came to Earth. We don't know where it came from. We've never found the source. And we've stopped looking, because the source stopped mattering once it was already in our oceans. It got into our food, our water, our people. It did to Earth exactly what it was doing to your convoy, except that we did not have a fleet of firefighters to call, because there was no one to call, because we were young then, and alone, and nobody in the galaxy had ever heard of us, and the few who had thought of us as a backwater not worth the trouble of a hello. So we faced the bloom by ourselves, and we lost. Not all the way, but we lost more than I am going to describe to you, engineer, because some numbers shouldn't be said out loud to a being who just held a door for 6,000 people and earned a rest instead of a horror story. We lost enough that there is not a human alive who does not know what the bloom is, the way there is not a human alive who does not know how to breathe. It is in us. It is the thing we are made against. Bren Oda listened, his back against the bulkhead, and he understood that he was hearing something the Coalition had never been told, the dark history that the rumor had only hinted at. He had imagined, in the way that the younger races imagined Earth, that the humans were a strong people who had always been strong, who had built their great fleets out of confidence and power. He understood now that it was the opposite, that the strength had been built out of catastrophe, that the 4,000 warships hanging around his convoy were not a monument to human power, but a monument to human grief, a thing assembled by survivors of a horror, so that no one else would have to survive it the same way they had. Bren Oda asked one more thing, because there was a question that had been sitting in him since he first watched the gray suits walk toward the rot that everyone else fled. Specialist, he said, the two handlers I could not save. In the first hold, I sealed the door with them inside, because there was nothing else to do, because the rot was already in them, and I could not stop it, and I could not let it spread. I have been telling myself for 2 days that there was nothing else to do. You are the expert. You have done this 600 years. Tell me the truth, because I would rather have the truth than the comfort. Was there anything else I could have done? There was a pause, and Bren Oda understood that Ruiz was deciding whether to give him the comfort or the truth, and he was glad, in the end, that she chose the truth. Because the truth from an expert is the only thing that ever quiets that particular question. No, she said. There was nothing else. Once the bloom is in a body, that body is gone, and the kindest and bravest and most skilled thing anyone can do is exactly what you did, which is seal it away from the living before it can use that body to reach them. You think you abandoned them. You didn't. You stopped them from being turned into a weapon against the 6,000 behind you. That's not abandonment, engineer. That's the hardest mercy there is, and most beings can't do it, because most beings can't make themselves seal a door on someone who's still looking back at them through the port. You did? It cost you something. I can hear that it cost you something. But you did the one right thing, the only right thing, and the 6,000 are alive because you could do the thing that almost no one can do. Bren Oda was quiet for a long while after that. It did not take the grief away. Nothing would take the grief away. He understood that, and did not want it taken away, because the grief was the last thing he had left of the two handlers and he meant to keep it. But it took away the other thing, the worst thing, the question of whether he had failed them, and in its place it left something he could carry, which was the knowledge that he had done the hardest mercy there was, and that an expert who had done this for 600 years had told him so, plainly, without comfort, as one working being to another. He thought that this too was a thing the humans understood that the Coalition did not, the difference between comfort and truth, and the way that truth, even hard truth, is the only thing that ever truly quiets a working being's worst question. The Coalition's physicians would have given him comfort. The human firefighter gave him the truth, and the truth was harder and kinder both, and he was grateful for it in a way that comfort could never have earned. We beat it eventually, Ruiz went on. It took everything. It took longer than your whole coalition has existed. And when it was finally done, when the last of the bloom on Earth was contained and burned and verified, we made a decision as a species, one decision, and we have never once reconsidered it. We decided that no one else would ever have to face the bloom alone the way we did. Not because we're kind, engineer. I won't lie to you about that. We're not saints. We did it because we know exactly what the bloom does when it's left to grow. And a bloom anywhere in the galaxy is a bloom that can reach everywhere eventually, including back to us. So we built the 10th Fleet. 4,000 ships whose only purpose, the only thing they are ever used for, is to go wherever a bloom appears, as fast as physically possible, with enough hands to draw the line before the line can't be drawn anymore. We have been waiting 600 years for someone to call. Most species never call, because most species don't know we exist, or don't believe the rumor, or are too proud to ask strangers for help. Your coordinator Yenu called. She asked for one medic, and she apologized in advance for the imposition. Do you understand what that request looked like, on our end, engineer? It looked like someone drowning who was too polite to shout. So you sent the fleet, Bren Oda said. We sent the fleet, Ruiz said, because we do not send one medic to a bloom. We learned that the worst possible way, 600 years ago, and we are never going to forget it, and we are never going to let anyone else learn it the way we did. You asked us for the smallest possible favor. There is no small favor where the bloom is concerned. There is only enough force fast enough, or there is a dead world. You called us in time. Most of the cost of 4,000 warships, engineer, is the cost of being able to arrive in 19 minutes instead of 19 days, because with the bloom, the difference between 19 minutes and 19 days is the difference between a contained convoy and a contaminated arm of the galaxy. We did not overspend. We spent exactly what the bloom costs. You just didn't know the price. Bren Oda was quiet for a moment, turning the thing over in his tired mind, the way a working being turns over a tool he has never seen before, learning its shape. There is a thing I do not understand, he said at last. You say you waited 600 years for someone to call. 600 years is a long time, specialist. Longer than my whole species has had ships. In 600 years, how do you keep 4,000 warships ready for a call that almost never comes? How do the crews not lose heart, waiting their whole lives for a fire that may not come in their lifetimes? My own convoy crews lose heart on a long run with no port. How do you wait 600 years and stay ready? There was a pause on the channel, and when Ruiz answered, there was something in her voice that Bren Oda had not heard before, a kind of quiet pride that had no boast in it. Because we don't think of it as waiting, she said. We think of it as keeping a promise. There's a difference, engineer, and it's the whole difference. Waiting is passive. You sit, and you hope nothing happens, and the years wear you down because you're doing nothing. Keeping a promise is active. Every drill, every patrol, every day, a crew spends ready, and the call doesn't come. That's not a wasted day. That's a day we kept the promise. And a kept promise feels like something, even when nothing happens. The crews don't lose heart, because they understand what they're for. A being who knows what they're for can wait a very long time. A being who's only waiting can't wait at all. We made ourselves into a promise 600 years ago, and a promise doesn't get tired. Because a promise isn't about how you feel, it's about what you'll do. And what we'll do is come, every time, all the way, the moment anyone calls. You called, here we are. That's the whole of it. Bren Oda thought about that, sitting on the deck with his back against the door he had held, and he understood that the humans had told him something true, not just about the bloom but about themselves, and about a kind of strength his own people did not have a word for. The coalition was a careful people. A practical people. A people who counted costs and rationed help and apologized for imposing. It was a good way to be. It had kept the coalition alive through famines and plagues no fleet could fix. But it was a way of being that could never have built the 10th Fleet. Because the 10th Fleet did not make sense by any accounting the coalition understood. 4,000 warships, kept ready for 600 years, for a call that came once in centuries, spending the wealth of a whole civilization on a promise to strangers. It was, by every coalition measure, an absurd extravagance, a waste beyond reckoning, and it had just saved 6,000 lives on a convoy at the edge of nowhere, and it was about to save a great many more, because the bloom on the third convoy had never been the whole of it, and the part the coalition had not yet understood was about to arrive. It was at that moment that the larger truth arrived, because the bloom on the third convoy had never been the whole of it. Bren Oda's handset and Coordinator Yenu's relief board and Admiral Cole Hartley's command deck all lit at once with the same report, and the report was that the third convoy had not been the only one. The bloom had been seeding itself across the Harvester Coalition for 2 months before anyone understood what it was, riding the convoys from world to world in the great living cargo holds, and the third convoy had simply been the first to weep gray. Now, with the rot finally identified and the human fleet finally arrived, the Coalition's instruments were finding it everywhere, in the 4th convoy, and the 9th, and the 17th, in the granaries of 2 outer worlds, in a relief depot, in places no one had thought to look because no one had known what they were looking for. The bloom was not a single fire on a single convoy. It was 100 fires across a quarter of Coalition space, and they were all growing, and the Coalition had no force in existence that could fight even one of them, let alone 100 at once. In the relief office, Sieth watched the contacts bloom across the board, one after another, each one a place where the gray weeping had begun, and his young voice, when he reported them, had gone past fear into something flatter and worse, the numbness of a being watching the end of everything he knew. "Coordinator," he said, "it is in the 9th convoy. The 17th. The granary at Hesh. The depot at the 3rd moon of Var. It is everywhere, Coordinator. We thought it was one convoy, and it is everywhere. It has been everywhere for 2 months, riding in the holds, and we sent it ourselves, convoy to convoy, world to world. We carried it everywhere we went, and we never knew." He turned to Yenu, and there were no words left in him for the size of it. "A quarter of the Coalition, 100 fires. We do not have the ships. We have never had the ships. We are going to lose everything, and we carried it ourselves." Coordinator Yenu's voice came over the fleet channel, and it was the voice of a being looking at the end of her civilization. "Admiral Hartley, the bloom is everywhere. It is in 100 places. We thought it was one convoy. It is 100. We do not have the ships. We do not have the hands. We asked you for 1 medic, and you brought 4,000 ships, and it is still not enough, because we did not understand the size of the thing we were asking about. Admiral, I do not know how to ask for what we actually need, because I do not think there is enough of anything in the galaxy to fight 100 blooms, and I am sorry. I am so sorry. I asked for the smallest favor, and the truth was the largest one anyone has ever needed." And Admiral Cole Hartley of Earth's 10th Fleet answered her, and his voice was as calm as it had been the first moment, and the calm was the thing that finally made Yenu understand who she was talking to. "Coordinator Yenu," he said, "stop apologizing. You keep apologizing, and it is the only thing about humans you still don't understand, so let me fix it now. 100 blooms is not too much to ask. There is no such thing as too much to ask, where the bloom is concerned. You are worried that 4,000 ships is not enough for 100 fires. You're right, it isn't. So I have already sent word home, and the rest of the 10th Fleet is already moving, and behind it, the 11th, and behind the 11th whatever else it takes, because this is the one thing, the single thing, that Earth does not count the cost of. You did not ring a small bell, Coordinator. You rang the one bell that Earth has spent 600 years promising itself it would always answer, all the way, every time, no matter the number. 100 blooms. We will put out 100 fires. We have been waiting 600 years for someone to need exactly this, and you needed it. And we are coming, all of us, until every last gray weeping hold in your coalition is dark and cold and clean. Now, show me where the 100 fires are, and let the 10th Fleet do what it was built to do." Yenu, who had spent 30 years learning that there was never enough of anything, that relief work was always the grim arithmetic of choosing who to save, because you could not save them all, heard an Admiral of Earth tell her that there was no such thing as too much to ask, and she did not know how to hold it. It went against everything 30 years had taught her. And then she watched the board, and she watched the second half of the 10th Fleet cross into Coalition space, 4,000 more warships, and behind them, the leading edge of the 11th, and she understood that the Admiral had not been speaking comfort. He had been speaking fact. The humans really did not count the cost of this. They had built their entire civilization's grief into a force that would spend whatever it took, and the arithmetic that had ruled Yenu's whole career, the arithmetic of scarcity and hard choices, simply did not apply to the one thing the humans had decided would never again be subject to it. The campaign against the 100 blooms lasted 41 days, and Bren Oda spent every one of them inside it, because when Specialist Dana Ruiz had asked him whether he wanted to go home and rest, or stay and help, he had not even had to think about the answer. He was a cargo engineer. He knew the convoys, the holds, the ducts, the welds, the thousand small ways the bloom could hide inside a harvester ship, better than any human who had never set foot on one. The 10th Fleet had the hands and the speed and the 600 years of hard knowledge, but it did not have the Coalition's own structural schematics in its bones, and Bren Oda did, and so Bren Oda became, in the strange leveling way that a crisis makes of rank and species, a member of the 10th Fleet's containment effort, an ordinary cargo engineer working shoulder to shoulder with the most experienced firefighters in the galaxy. He learned how they worked. He learned that the calm in their voices was not the calm of beings who felt no fear, but the calm of beings who had decided, long ago and as a species, that the bloom was the one enemy they would never let themselves panic against, because panic was the only way to lose to it. He learned that they were not, in fact, saints, that they argued and complained and made dark jokes and got exhausted exactly like any other beings, and that this made what they were doing more impressive rather than less, because they were not doing it out of some inhuman perfection, but out of an ordinary stubborn refusal, a working being's refusal, the same refusal that had kept Bren Oda sealing holds when the physicians ran. He recognized it because he had it too. It turned out that the thing that made humanity the galaxy's firefighters was not anything exotic. It was the same plain stubbornness that lived in a tired cargo engineer who would not let a door fail on his watch. The humans simply had 4,000 ships worth of it, and 600 years of practice, and a promise they had made to themselves that they had never once broken. He worked beside Ruiz most often, because she had asked for him by name after the third convoy, and the two of them developed the wordless understanding that working beings develop when they are good at the same hard thing. She taught him the human method, the way a fire is read, the way a line is drawn, the way the bloom's hungry intelligence is anticipated rather than chased. He taught her the coalition ships, the forgotten conduits, the places a harvester hull hid spaces that the schematics did not show, the small structural quirks of a people who had built their vessels around cargo rather than war. Between the two of them, they closed fires faster than either could have closed alone, and Bren Oda came to understand that this too was the human method. Not 4,000 ships acting as one great machine, but 4,000 ships made of beings who knew how to take a local stranger and make him part of the work within an hour, because the bloom did not care about rank or species or pride, and neither, when the fire was burning, did the 10th Fleet. The 100 fires went out one by one. Some were easy, caught early, a single hold on a single convoy, contained and burned and verified in an hour. Some were terrible, whole granaries on whole worlds, weeks of grinding work, the line drawn and held across a planet's worth of infrastructure, while the bloom tried every trick its hungry intelligence possessed, and the humans answered each trick with the one thing it could not overcome, which was enough, hands fast enough, everywhere at once. The 11th Fleet arrived on the 9th day, 8,000 more ships, and the work went faster. By the 20th day, the bloom had stopped growing across the coalition for the first time since it began, and by the 35th day, it was retreating. It contained fire by contained fire, and on the 41st day, Specialist Dana Ruiz stood in the last gray weeping hold in the Harvester Coalition, a small cargo bay on the 17th convoy, and watched it go dark and cold and clean, and reported to Admiral Hartley that the coalition was free of the bloom. The arrival of the 11th Fleet on the 9th day was a thing Bren Oda watched from the deck of a convoy, and it told him more about the humans than any speech could have. The 10th Fleet had been fighting for 9 days by then, spread across a quarter of coalition space, holding 100 fires at once, stretched to its limit and beyond, and Bren Oda had begun to wonder, in the back of his exhausted mind, whether even the humans could be enough, whether 100 fires was simply more than any force could hold. And then the board lit again, the way it had lit on the first day, contacts crossing into coalition space in blocks too fast to count, and it was the 11th Fleet, 8,000 more ships, arriving exactly as Admiral Hartley had said they would, behind the 10th, behind the first promise, a second wave of the same impossible commitment. What struck Bren Oda was not the number, though the number was staggering. It was the ordinariness of it. The 11th Fleet did not arrive with any ceremony, any announcement. any sense that something extraordinary was happening. It simply arrived and slotted itself into the work, and within an hour, its crews were fighting fires beside the 10th's crews, as though they had always been there, because to the humans, this was not extraordinary at all. This was the thing they were for. This was the promise being kept, the way it had been built to be kept, in waves, all the way, until the job was done, no matter how many waves it took. There was no drama in it for them, because they had decided 600 years ago that there would be no drama in it, that the answer to a bloom would always be simply everything, applied without hesitation and without limit, until the fire was out. Bren Oda understood, watching the 11th Fleet fold into the work without a ripple, that he had been wrong to wonder whether the humans could be enough. The question of whether they could be enough was a coalition question, a question that assumed a fixed amount of force and a fixed amount of need, and the grim arithmetic of matching one against the other. The humans did not ask that question. They had removed it from their thinking entirely, 600 years before, and replaced it with a single answer that came before any question. Whatever it takes. There was no amount of bloom that could exhaust whatever it takes, because whatever it takes was not a quantity. It was a commitment, and a commitment does not run out. By the 20th day, the rhythm of the campaign had become something Bren Oda could feel in his bones, the steady tightening of a net across a quarter of the galaxy, fire after fire going dark and cold and clean, the Bloom's 100 strongholds falling one by one, as the combined fleets brought to each of them the same thing they had brought to the third convoy, enough hands fast enough, everywhere at once. The Bloom fought the whole way. It was smart, and it was patient, and it had 2 months of growth and a quarter of the coalition to hide in, and it used every advantage, slipping between worlds in the holds of ships, doubling back, going still, and waiting when it could not advance. But it had finally met the one thing in the galaxy it could not outpace, the one thing 600 years of human grief had been built to be, and against that thing, its cleverness availed it nothing, because the humans were not trying to be cleverer than the Bloom. They were simply being more numerous, and more committed, and more relentless than the Bloom. And against numbers and commitment and relentlessness, cleverness alone had never once been enough, not for the Bloom, and not for anything. The cost, on the human side, was real. Bren Oda made certain he understood it, because he owed it to them to understand it. The 10th Fleet did not lose a single ship, because the Bloom was not the kind of enemy that destroyed ships, and the human warship in this fight never failed and never retreated and never lost a single engagement against the thing it had been built 600 years to fight. But the firefighters who walked into the rot were not invulnerable the way their hulls were, and some of them did not walk out, because the Bloom was patient and hungry, and one mistake near it was one mistake too many. And over 41 days, the 10th and 11th Fleets paid the price that the Coalition's own physicians had run from paying. Bren Oda learned every one of their names. He insisted on it. He was a cargo engineer, and cargo engineers keep accounts, and this was an account he intended to keep for the rest of his life. He learned the names of the humans who had walked into the gray weeping holds so that beings they had never met might live, and he learned that the humans themselves kept these names too, that Earth had a long memory for the ones it lost to the Bloom, that every name was recorded and read and remembered, because a people who had built their whole strength out of grief did not waste a single death by forgetting it. One of the 100 fires, on the 30th day, was worse than all the others, and Bren Oda was there for it, and it taught him the last thing he needed to know about the people he was working beside. It was the granary at Hesh, an outer world that fed 4 others, a great planet-side complex of living stores stretching across a plain, and the Bloom had been growing in it unseen for the whole 2 months, longer than anywhere else, and by the time the 10th Fleet reached it, the Bloom had spread through the entire complex and was reaching, that very day, toward the city that lay beyond it. If the city was reached, the world was lost, and if the world was lost, 4 others starved. There was no margin at Hesh, there was only the line, and the line had to be drawn across a planet's worth of infrastructure, all at once, faster than the Bloom could cross the last few kilometers to the city, and there were not enough hours in the day to do it the careful way. So the humans did not do it the careful way. They did it the way that had cost them, the way that walked beings into the rot, to draw the line by hand, where no machine could draw it fast enough, and over the course of one long, terrible day, Bren Oda watched the firefighters of Earth spend themselves at HFY, the way he had not yet seen them spend themselves, walking into places they knew were too dangerous, because the alternative was a dead world, holding lines that should not have been holdable, and not all of them walked out. Bren Oda worked beside them through the whole of it, doing the thing he was best at, sealing the structural seams that bought the line its margin. And when the day was over, and the city was saved, and the granary was dark and cold and clean, he learned the names of the ones who had not walked out, and he found that the survivors were already saying those names aloud to each other, quietly, in the human way, so that the dead would be the first thing remembered and not the last. He understood then that the calm he had taken for fearlessness was nothing of the kind. The humans at HFY had been afraid, plainly afraid the way any being is afraid, walking into a thing that kills. They had walked in anyway, not because they felt no fear, but because they had decided, 600 years before, that the bloom was the one thing they would face afraid, rather than not face at all. That was the deepest lesson of the 41 days, deeper even than the category error, deeper than the attention and the numbers and the speed. The humans were not invulnerable. Their hulls never failed, but the beings inside them were as breakable as any being in the galaxy, and they knew it, and they walked into the rot anyway, every time, all the way, because a promise made in grief 600 years ago was a heavier thing than fear, and they had built their whole strength not out of being unafraid, but out of being afraid, and choosing to come regardless. Bren Oda, who had sealed his holds afraid and held his door afraid, and worked 41 days afraid, understood this in his bones, because it was the same thing he had done, only smaller, and he understood at last that the difference between him and the firefighters of Earth was not a difference of kind. It was only a difference of how many of them there were, and how long they had been practicing, and how deep the old wound went that they had all agreed, as one people, never to let happen to anyone else. When it was over, Coordinator Yenyu came aboard the flagship of the 10th Fleet to thank Admiral Cole Hartley, and she had spent, this time, not 4 days but the whole 41 nights choosing her words, and she stood before the human admiral and the human firefighters and the cargo engineer who had become one of them, and she found that all her careful words had deserted her, and what came out instead was the plain truth. "We asked you for one medic," she said. "We were too proud and too polite and too small to ask for more, and the truth is that one medic would have died in the first hold, and we would have lost everything, the whole coalition, 250 million lives, because we did not understand the size of what we were facing. You understood it from one short message. You read our apology for the imposition, and you heard a people drowning, and you sent everything, all of it, 4,000 ships, and then 4,000 more, and you spent 41 days, and a price I will never be able to repay, putting out 100 fires for a people you had never met. And when I try to understand why, the only answer I have is the one your specialist gave my engineer. You do not send one medic to a bloom, you never have. And now we know why, and now we will never forget it. And the Harvester Coalition will be telling the story of the days Earth came, for as long as there is a Harvester Coalition to tell it." Admiral Hartley looked at her for a long moment, and then he did a very human thing, which was that he looked tired, and let her see it. The tiredness of a being who has just spent 41 days putting out fires and is glad, plainly and simply glad, that they are out. "Coordinator," he said, "the thanks I want from you isn't words. It's this. The next time the bloom appears anywhere near your space, you call us in the first hour, not the second month. You don't apologize. You don't choose humble words. You don't ask for the smallest possible favor. You tell us there's a bloom, and you tell us where, and you let us come. That's all. We spent 600 years building a fleet for exactly this, and the worst thing in the galaxy, the only thing that still frightens us, is the thought of a bloom growing somewhere, because the people facing it were too proud or too polite to call. Don't ever be too polite to call. That's the whole price. That's all we want." Yenyu tried to accept it, and found that 30 years of relief work fought her every step of the way. "Admiral," she said, "you ask a thing that is harder for us than you know. My whole life has taught me to ask for the least, because there is never enough. Because asking for too much takes from someone else who also needs. You are telling me to ask for everything, the moment I need it, without counting the cost. I do not know how to be that kind of being. The coalition does not know how to be that kind of people. I know, Hartley said, and there was a gentleness in it. It's a good way to be, Coordinator, the way you are. It's kept your people alive through things that would have broken a prouder species. I'm not asking you to change how you are about everything. Only about this. The bloom is the one thing in the galaxy where asking for the least gets everyone killed. Because the least is never enough, and the bloom doesn't slow down while you're being polite. So make it a rule. One rule, just for this. When it's the bloom, you ask for everything, and you ask in the first hour, and you let us spend whatever it costs. Because we already decided 600 years ago that we would, and you refusing to ask doesn't save us anything. It only costs you time you don't have. Will you make that one rule, Coordinator, for this one thing? And Yenu, who had spent 30 years learning that there was never enough, looked at the 8,000 warships that had spent 41 days proving that for this one thing, there was always enough, and she made the rule. It was the hardest thing the humans asked of the coalition, harder than the wreckage and the names and the long campaign, because it asked the coalition to unlearn the deepest lesson of its own survival, and to trust, for this one thing, that the cost did not need to be counted. She made the rule anyway, and she carried it home, and it became, in time, the first law of the coalition's relief code, written above all the others. When it is the bloom, ask for everything, in the first hour, and do not apologize. There was a conversation between Coordinator Yenu and Admiral Hartley, in the quiet days of verification near the end, that Yenu never put in any official record, but never forgot, because it answered the one question that had haunted her since the board first counted to 4,000. She had asked him, plainly, the thing she could not stop wondering. Why us? The galaxy was full of suffering. There were famines and plagues and disasters everywhere, all the time. And the coalition was one small people at the edge of human space, of no particular importance, with nothing to offer Earth in return. Why spend so much on them for nothing? And Hartley had told her a thing she had not expected, which was that it was not for nothing, and it was not, in the end, even really about the coalition at all. When the bloom came to Earth, he said, and we faced it alone, and we lost as much as we lost, there was a thing we promised ourselves in the worst of it. In the years when we thought it might take everything, we promised that the suffering would mean something, not in the way people usually mean that, not some comfort about it all being part of a plan. We meant it as a job. We promised that we would take the one thing we had learned, the thing we paid for in a price I still won't name to you, and we would make sure no one else ever had to pay it. That promise is the only thing that made the years bearable, Coordinator. It's the thing that turned the worst grief in our history into something we could carry. So when you call, and we come, and we spend whatever it costs, we are not doing you a favor. We are keeping the promise that keeps our own grief bearable. You think you owe us. You don't. If anything, it's closer to the other way around. Every bloom we put out for someone else is a bloom that makes our own dead mean something. You gave us that, when you called. You let our 600 years of grief do the one thing it was always for. That's not a debt you owe us. That's a gift you gave us, and you didn't even know you were giving it. Yenu carried that conversation for the rest of her life, and she understood from it the deepest and strangest truth about the species at the edge of her space, which was that the humans had found a way to make their worst catastrophe into the engine of their greatest kindness, and that the kindness was not in spite of the catastrophe, but because of it, grown directly out of it, the way the strongest things sometimes grow out of the worst ground. She had spent 30 years in relief work, believing that suffering was simply suffering, a thing to be reduced where possible, and endured where not, with no meaning in it, but the meaning the sufferer chose to impose. The humans had taught her something she had not believed was possible, which was that a people could take their suffering and forge it, deliberately and across centuries, into a promise that protected strangers, and that in the keeping of that promise, the old suffering became, not erased, never erased, but redeemed, made into the foundation of something that saved lives the suffering itself had never been able to save. It was the most human thing she ever learned, and she taught it to Seath, and Seath taught it to the analysts who came after, and it passed into the Coalition's understanding of the galaxy, alongside the first law of the Relief Code, the two truths together, the law and the reason for it. When it is the bloom, Ask for everything, in the first hour, and do not apologize, because the ones you are asking have been waiting 600 years for the chance to keep a promise, and your asking is not a burden to them, but the gift they have been hoping for. And Bren Oda, the cargo engineer who had held the last door, stood among the firefighters of Earth and the relief officers of the Coalition, and felt the particular quiet that comes after a long fire is finally out. The quiet that is not triumph, because triumph is loud, but something better and rarer. The deep plain relief of a working being who has held the line and watched the danger pass, and gets, at last, to rest. He thought of the 2 handlers he had not been able to save, in the first hold, before he understood what the rot was. He thought of the 6,000 crew of the 3rd convoy who were alive. He thought of the 250 million lives across the Coalition who would never know how close they had come, because the fire had been put out before it reached them, and the thing about a fire that is put out in time is that the people it would have killed never learned they were ever in danger at all. They would go on with their lives, never knowing, and that was exactly as it should be, and Bren Oda found that he did not need them to know. He knew, the firefighters knew, the record knew, that was enough. Before the fleets left, Specialist Dana Ruiz came to find Bren Oda one last time, and she did a thing the humans did, a thing the Coalition had no custom for, which was that she gave him something to keep. It was a small thing, a marker of some kind, the sort of token the 10th Fleet gave its own, and she told him that by the reckoning of Earth he had earned it, that he had walked into a bloom and held a line, and worked 41 days beside the firefighters, and lost some of what was behind him, and saved the rest, and that this made him, in every way that the 10th Fleet counted, one of them. Bren Oda did not know what to say. He was a cargo engineer. He sealed holds and cleaned air, and kept convoys moving. He had never been one of anything before, only a working being doing his work, where his work happened to be. But he took the marker, and he kept it, and he understood that the humans had given him a thing they did not give lightly, the thing they had given to each other for 600 years, a place in the long account of the ones who held the line, and he carried it for the rest of his life, and showed it to no one, because some things are kept rather than shown. Years later, when Bren Oda was old, a young cargo engineer on his convoy found him one night checking a seal that did not need checking, and asked him why he bothered, when the automatic systems would have caught any flaw. Bren Oda thought about how to answer, and in the end, he told the young engineer a short version of the truth, that he had once held a door against a thing that ate worlds, and that the door had held because he had sealed it well, and that he had learned that night that there was no such thing as a seal that did not matter, because you never knew which seal was the one with 6,000 lives behind it. The young engineer thought this was an old man's exaggeration, the way the young always think the old exaggerate, and Bren Oda did not try to convince him otherwise, because some things cannot be told, only learned, and he hoped, in a way he did not say aloud, that the young engineer would never have to learn this particular thing the way he had. He went on checking seals that did not need checking for the rest of his working life, and he never told the young ones about the marker in his pocket, and when he finally retired, the Coalition put his name at the head of the record of the days Earth came, exactly as Coordinator Yenu had insisted long before. The working being who held the door, first of all the names, before the admirals and the fleets and the 100 fires, so that every Coalition child who learned the story would learn it the right way, beginning with the one who held long enough for the rescue to arrive. The 10th Fleet stayed another 9 days to verify, because verifying was the part the humans never skipped. The part 600 years of hard experience had taught them was the difference between a fire out and a fire hidden. Bren Oda worked those 9 days too, going through the convoys he knew best, checking the welds and the conduits and the forgotten spaces, because he wanted to be certain with his own hands that the thing was truly gone, and the humans let him, because they understood the wish, having had it themselves about their own world 600 years before. And then, with the Harvester Coalition clean and cold, and free of the bloom for the first time in 2 months, the 4,000 ships of the 10th Fleet and the 4,000 of the 11th turned for home, unhurried, in the same disciplined formation they had arrived in, and Coordinator Yenu and Bren Oda and the whole of the relief station watched them go, and no one spoke, because there was nothing left that needed saying. Bren Oda went back to being a cargo engineer. He sealed holds and cleaned air, and kept convoys moving, the same plain work he had always done, and most days, No one who passed him in a corridor would have known that he had once knelt with a welder, a hand's width from the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, and held a door for 6,000 lives, or that he had worked 41 days beside the firefighters of Earth, or that he carried, in a pocket he never opened in company, a small marker that named him one of them. But the Coalition knew. They put it in the record, the way the humans had taught them to keep records. And the record of the days Earth came began, as Coordinator Yenu insisted it must, not with the 4,000 warships, and not with the Admiral, and not with the 100 fires, but with one tired cargo engineer, who would not let a door fail, because the humans had taught the Coalition one last thing in 41 days, which was that the line against the worst thing in the galaxy is not held by the powerful, or the brave, or the chosen. It is held by whoever refuses to let go, and it is held best of all by a great many of them, refusing together, fast enough, everywhere at once. The young analyst, CF, who had watched the 100 fires bloom across his board and had believed, for one terrible hour, that he was watching the end of his civilization, became in the years that followed the keeper of the new relief code, the one who taught it to the analysts who came after him. He taught them the first law, the hardest one, the one Yenu had carried home from the flagship, and he taught them why it was first, telling them the story of the board that had counted to 4,000 when the Coalition had asked for one, and the second board that had counted 100 fires, and the Admiral's voice saying, "There is no such thing as too much to ask." He taught them that the Coalition's old habit of asking for the least was wisdom in all things but one, and that the one thing was the bloom, and that for the bloom they must unlearn their deepest caution and trust the promise that the humans had made and never broken. And he taught them, last of all, to keep the record honestly, the human way, the way Yenu had insisted, beginning always with the working being who held the door, because the Coalition had learned that the truest account of a great rescue starts not with the rescuers, but with the one who held long enough for the rescue to arrive. And at the head of that record, in the place of honor, the Harvester Coalition wrote the sentence that they would teach their children, and the children of the worlds they traded with, and eventually, a good part of the galaxy, the sentence that finally explained the thing the rumor had only hinted at, the truest thing the Coalition had ever learned about the species at the edge of their space. They begged Earth for a single medic, because they did not yet understand that Earth does not send one medic to a bloom, and Earth sent the whole 10th fleet, and then the 11th, and then everything it had, and put out 100 fires across a quarter of the galaxy for a people it had never met, and when it was done it asked for nothing in return but a promise, which was this: next time, do not be too polite to call.